This video is about the questions from several friends regarding the interpretation of David Graeber and David Wengrow's The Dawn of Everything. Below are our responses, for reference only. Question 1. If indigenous cultures were so advanced, why were they ultimately wiped out? If this argument can be overturned, does that mean Darwin's theory of evolution, natural selection, survival of the fittest, should also be rejected? Response. We've discussed this before. Natural selection, survival of the fittest, was not a phrase coined by Darwin. It actually comes from the British anthropologist Thomas Huxley's Evolution and Ethics, and even then, it was a misinterpretation of Darwin's theory. Darwin never claimed that a group must be strong, highly combative, or capable of defeating others to survive. The true essence of evolution is adaptation. Adapting to natural conditions and adapting to society. One of the best ways to adapt to society is through cooperation, not conflict. Some groups may seem weak but excel at collaboration and playing intermediary roles, allowing them to thrive. Meanwhile, groups that constantly seek conflict, fighting one enemy today and another tomorrow, may actually be more vulnerable to extinction. Specifically regarding North American indigenous peoples, before European colonization, their total population ranged from approximately 5 million to 18 million. After several centuries of colonization, their numbers dropped to less than 1/10 of that. While war and violence certainly played a significant role, such as direct massacres, forced relocations, land dispossession, and the destruction of natural resources, the primary cause of their population decline was infectious disease. European colonizers brought smallpox, measles, and influenza from their continent. Europeans had already been exposed to these diseases for generations, and those who survived had developed stronger immunity. However, indigenous peoples in the Americas had never encountered these pathogens before, leading to devastating outbreaks and mass deaths upon first contact. That's why Jared Diamond's book is titled Guns, Germs, and Steel. The lethality of germs was immense. If we're talking about survival of the fittest, disease was the greatest test. China also faced this challenge. In the late Ming dynasty, smallpox and the plague spread widely, contributing to the fall of the Ming Empire. Question 2. I'd like to ask, language is actually a barrier to communication. What allowed early humans to overcome language barriers and travel extensively? And what made such travel feasible? Is this an innate human instinct? Response. This is a fascinating phenomenon. The book doesn't go into much detail, but there is strong evidence to support it. For example, several hundred years ago, nearly every Native American would take at least one long journey in their lifetime, and their cultural zone spanned the entire North American continent. In Australia, the semi-nomadic Aboriginal groups also had cultural zones stretching across the continent. Ethnographic studies show that, while indigenous peoples often spoke different languages, they might share the same spiritual totems, which made them consider each other kin upon meeting. Even when they didn't share the same totem, they were generally received with hospitality. If we think about it, many modern nomadic groups still have traditions of warmly welcoming travelers. A lone traveler poses no real threat. Moreover, hunter-gatherers were inherently always on the move, meaning that everyone, at some point, would be a guest in someone else's land. Natural resources were seen as shared, rather than owned. Clear boundaries and territorial disputes typically only emerge when large groups interact with other large groups. Question 3. Do you believe that human-caused carbon emissions will destroy the Earth? If, as the author suggests, the Earth primarily experiences ice ages, wouldn't that mean human activity actually helps humanity survive on Earth? Response. This is a matter of perspective. Let's first take a look at past ice age cycles. The pattern follows a roughly 100,000-year cycle, where each ice age lasts 80,000 to 90,000 years, while interglacial, warm, periods are much shorter, typically 10,000 to 20,000 years. Based on this rhythm, since our current interglacial period began 11,700 years ago, we should be nearing its end. This graph makes it clearer. Yet, we haven't entered another ice age. Why is that? Your intuition might suggest that human activities have increased carbon dioxide levels, causing global warming and delaying the next ice age. But that's not exactly what scientists say. The timing of ice ages isn't fixed. It's controlled by three orbital parameters: eccentricity, axial tilt, and precession, along with the amount of ice in the northern hemisphere at the time. Some computer models suggest that, even without human influence, this particular interglacial period was already unusual and could last another 50,000 years. Additionally, some climatologists argue that human activity didn't just delay an ice age. It actually triggered a mini-ice age. In the late 16th to early 17th century, European colonization of the Americas led to mass deaths of Native Americans due to disease. As a result, farmland was abandoned, forests and wildlands expanded, carbon dioxide levels dropped, and the planet cooled. Some Chinese scholars even believe this mini-ice age contributed to the fall of the Ming dynasty. Following this narrative, when the Industrial Revolution began, increased carbon emissions warmed the planet on top of an already warm interglacial period, further intensifying global warming. If you accept this view, it would suggest that, whatever humans do, they're always making things worse for the planet. My skepticism is this. If European colonization caused a mini-ice age, does that mean that, if Native Americans had never existed, the Earth would have entered a major ice age instead? Wouldn't that imply that human agricultural activities actually slowed down cooling? But I'm not a meteorologist. I have no idea how they're doing the math on this. Question 4. People ruled by agriculture lived extremely hard lives. Why didn't anyone choose to return to a hunter-gatherer lifestyle? Were they restricted by force? Or was the population too large and land too scarce, making it impossible to choose? In simple terms, if life was so difficult, why didn't anyone say no? Response. The answer is they were restricted by force. This is a radical view put forward by the renowned political scientist and anthropologist, James C. Scott. You may have heard of his books, Seeing Like a State, How Certain Schemes to Improve the Human Condition Have Failed and the Art of Not Being Governed, An Anarchist History of Upland Southeast Asia. In 2017, Scott published, Against the Grain, A Deep History of the Earliest States, which challenges our conventional understanding of farmers and agriculture. He makes several key arguments. 1. If you were born any time before 1600 CE and had a choice, you should choose to be a barbarian. That is, a hunter-gatherer living in the grasslands, forests, or coastal areas, rather than a farmer. Your life would be freer, easier, and more enjoyable, with much better nutrition. In contrast, a farmer's life was miserable. 2. Agriculture was never a voluntary choice for common people. It was forced labor imposed by the state. Early states, and later policies like Chow Chow's military farming system, forced people to cultivate land through military coercion. Over time, people may have simply gotten used to it and had no other way to survive, but fundamentally, agriculture was a form of enslavement, not an opportunity. In fact, even as late as 1800 CE, 3/4 of the world's population were unfree laborers. 3. The reason governments forced people into farming was taxation. Hunter-gatherers were nomadic, making it impossible for states to control and tax them. 4. Agricultural states could become powerful temporarily, but they were always fragile. They collapsed due to epidemics, peasant uprisings, or other crises. 5. The collapse of agricultural states was not a disaster for the common people. It was often a blessing. History books describe dynastic collapses as catastrophes, but in many cases, they actually freed large numbers of farmers, improving their lives. 6. China's Great Wall was not just to prevent barbarian invasions. It was to stop farmers from escaping and joining them. Scott argues that, as long as border trade was well managed, like the Song-Liao-Chan-Yuan Treaty, where the Song paid tribute to the Khitans, the so-called barbarians had no reason to invade. Following this logic, grain-based states extracted wealth from farmers, creating a tax-consuming elite, which led to localized prosperity, such as the splendor of Bianliang, Kaifeng. This prosperity then attracted barbarian raids, resulting in farmers being oppressed first by their rulers, then by invaders. Faced with this choice, farmers often preferred the state, without realizing that it was state oppression that made them vulnerable to invasions in the first place. Of course, you can choose whether to accept this theory. But I believe that glorifying Chinese farmers' hard work and endurance as a virtue is wrong. It's just another form of manipulation. If life is free and easy, why would anyone need to be hardworking and enduring in the first place? That's it for today's content. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
If you feel there is value in this, please like, subscribe to this channel, and leave your thoughts or suggestions in the comments section. Let's grow together and read more good books.